All right, here we go. Gotta let Shakira in. Okay. Okay, so this is quite a while ago that we started this conversation about emotional intelligence. So I think it's a time to kind of just review what we were talking about before fall break, and we did this assignment on emotional intelligence, and we did this thing on IQ. So what is emotional intelligence, just as part of a review of what we were talking about? If you remember, uh, when we left off, we were talking about developmental psychology. And I had mentioned that somewhere between the 24 to 36 months of age, we started to develop theory of mind. This is where an infant or a child or a young baby realizes that they have an emotional state, they have self recognition, and that other people can have their own separate emotional state, separate from them. And then the idea that of theory of mind is that what we do with that is, let's say, and mom is the bit to recognize that. They would say that this does not make sense. If mom's crying, I should be crying. All right. But after about 36 months, the baby will go up to mom and go, "What's wrong, mom? What's wrong? What's wrong?" Okay. And if you're a mom or a dad with that young child, you'll notice that transition where they notice that you're in a different emotional state that they're in. And they start to theorize what emotional state you're in. Now, I mentioned before we went on break, this is the basis of what we call empathy. Okay, but it has two stages. One, you have to develop the theory of mind, that's self-recognition, and then the recognition that other people can have different emotional states. But then you have to have what we call mirror neuron ability. Okay, that's a tongue twister for me right now. Um, Mirror neuroning is the ability that your brain, when you pay attention to someone else, and you pay very close attention to someone else, the neurons in their brain start to fire in your brain. So before the break, I gave two examples. One is in the movie theater. So if you're like me and you're bored with a movie, you start watching people. So if it's an action movie, you will notice that if it's a race scene, let's say, when the screen and the action scene, they lean right, the audience will lean right. When they lean left, the audience will lean left. Why is that happening? Because when that was filmed, the stunt person's neurons were firing to do that action. And what we have found is the audience in the movie theaters, the same neurons that were firing in the stunt person's brain start to fire in the people who are watching the movie. Okay. The other example comes from dating. Okay. So if you're like me and my wife, we go out, and when we go and when we go out to eat, it's not only about the meal, it's about the whole entire social situation. So me and my wife go and we watch people as much as we enjoy our own food. And I always watch for, anyways, people who I think are on a first date. How do you know people are on a first date? because in the beginning of their meal, they're totally separate from each other. They put their bags where they want them, they sit where they want, they act like they want, they do what they want. But you want to know what the number one predictor that there's going to be a second date is that by the end of the date, they start what's called parroting each other, meaning they mimic each other. By the end of the date, if their liquid is in the same position, their plate is in the same position, their forks and spoons are in the same position. When one eats, the other eats. When one drinks, the other drinks. If they're oriented towards each other, their legs are in the same position, and they're mimicking each other, I guarantee you there's going to be a second date. Because what's happening in that situation is they're becoming neurologically connected with each other. What's firing in one brain is firing in another other's brain, meaning that their brain has become one in the same. Okay, so we have mirror neuroning, we have theory of mind. These are the basis of empathy. Empathy is the ability to emotionally put yourself in someone else's state of being and realizing what they feel and you feel. But this is the falsehood behind empathy. Empathy does not increase helping behavior. All right. And I want to explain this. People who measure high in empathy are less likely to help someone in a crisis. Believe it or not, it is a person who doesn't give a flying flip about someone that makes a good EMT person, makes someone good in the hospital, makes someone. Why? Because they are not putting the same emotion you're feeling in that crisis into yours. People who are high in empathy are less likely to help. Okay. And I want you to think about this. Let's say you see, if you're high in empathy and you see someone in crisis, if you're feeling what they're feeling, what are they trying to do? They're trying to escape from that situation. Guess what you're going to do if you're high in empathy? You're going to try and escape that situation. You're going to do what they want to do. And so people high in empathy tend to be less helpful. That's why EMTs, people who are really good at emergency medical, that's why they seem so unempathetic because they can engage you without trying to escape you like you would if you're high in empathy. Okay. So what makes counselors, therapists who tend to be high in empathy good counselors and therapists and social workers? Because in order to do the work we do, you have to have a high amount of empathy. Okay. It comes down to emotional intelligence, which naturally develops by the age of 6. Why I say naturally is your natural amount of emotional intelligence is set by about the age of 6. Why I say natural is it's not that you can't learn emotional intelligence after that. It's kind of like a language. People who learn a second language by the age of 6 tend to learn it naturally. After the age of 6, it takes more work to learn a second language. This is the same thing with emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is that ability to understand my emotions, to feel someone else's emotions, and then to negotiate what is the appropriate balance between what I'm feeling, they're feeling, and what should I do in the situation to produce the best outcome. So the best therapists, the best social workers, the best group facilitators, high in empathy, but they're also high in emotional intelligence. And I'm just going to give this story because it highlights what I think uh, is this important point. Is I did work with in the women's prison system, which I contracted for. this wonderful individual. She was high in empathy, very, very, very high in empathy. She felt what her inmates were going through. She connected with them on such an emotional, empathetic level that you could feel it in the room when you walked in. Okay. But here's the issue. Within 6 months, she had 3 felonies because she felt so empathetic. She started to do things illegally to appease the people she was empathetic for. And she ended up being in the same women prison that she did therapy in. Now she was an inmate there because of her. She didn't have the emotional intelligence component to go, what is best for me and what is best for my client? What will produce the best outcome? High in empathy, low in emotional intelligence. Okay, so I want to point this out. This is a high risk field. If you do not develop EI and you're highly empathetic, you're not in the right field. And I want you to analyze this. And I want you to think about this. Okay. If you're low in empathy and you're in this field, you still have to have high emotional intelligence. Because if you're low in EI, you're not going to care about, if you're low in empathy, you're not going to care and you're just going to do what's self-guided for you. Okay. And you'll get through the field just fine, but you're going to be that grumpy person at the social welfare office that is just there from 9 to 5 and you're grumpy with everyone and just want to get through it. Okay. So just a review of why I'm bringing this up in this class. So again, we defined it. And again, the areas of study, executive competency, the ability to really analyze unattached and attached in a situation, interpersonal communication, it's important, relationship management, leadership development. These are all areas in which EI is important. Now, I do want to just warn everybody. Okay, I want to warn everybody. If you're going to go do research on emotional intelligence, there's two bodies of research. There's a body of research in the business area, and there's a body of research in psychology, social work, in our area. Okay. Be careful of definitions because in business, they define emotional intelligence as being how emotional you are. Okay. And so in a lot of the business literature, they say if you're over emotional, you're not going to be a good leader. What they're talking about is being overly empathetic. Okay. When we talk about emotional intelligence, what we're talking about is understanding your emotions, understanding someone else's emotion, and negotiating that for the best outcome. Okay, so the business literature says emotional intelligence isn't important, but it's because of the way they define it. So I just want to bring that up if you do some more research in this area. Stay away from the definitions that business tends to use in their cold, awful money-making world. Oh, did I say that? That was a bit, yeah, okay. All right, I want to talk about the difference between intelligence and emotional in intelligence, okay? When we talk about intelligence, IQ, we're talking about cognitive ability, logic, analytic. We're talking about bank memory, vocabulary. But when we're talking about emotional quote, emotional intelligence, we're talking about social, communicative, relationship ability, grasping one's own what grasping own as well as others' wants and needs, and gauges how well one copes with environmental demands and pressures. So I want to bring up just a couple people that I think our world tends to glorify. especially in our technology areas. Okay. And that is Bill Gates and the founder of Apple. Oh, I can't remember his name. Oh my goodness. Mm, Apple. Oh, okay, everyone, help me out. The founder of Apple. It was, let's see who's paying attention to the lecture. Help me out.
Was his
Steve
first name
Jobs.
Steve? Steve Jobs?
Steve Jobs. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, there are people paying attention. All right. Thank you. Steve Jobs. Okay. These individuals, if you looked at their IQs from a outside perspective, they probably don't have above average IQs. They couldn't barely completed high school, didn't graduate from college, all of those kinds of things. But what were they high in? They were high in emotional intelligence. Bill Gates was able to gauge what we emotionally wanted before we ever wanted it. Bill Gates understood that the what he was creating would create this communication gap that we had at that time, that we weren't connected with each other. I'm pre-internet, so I remember every part of my world was just based on the local news and a half hour of the national news. And Bill Gates understood that the computer would be able to bring the world together. These guys didn't have high IQs. If you look at their stories, they're not the ones that actually wrote most of the stuff for Windows or for the Apple phones or Apple computer. They did a lot. Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong on this. But what they both had was emotional intelligence. They understood what their consumers emotionally wanted. And emotionally, they wanted to connect with the world. So I just wanted to bring up those examples because people often think that Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they have these huge IQs. They didn't. They had average IQs, but they had above average emotional uh, IQs. Okay. So, all right. So let's talk about the four intelligent quotient attributes. Okay. So in the red, it's recognition of what I see. And the second one is regulation of what I do. And then in two domains, it's personal competence versus social competence. In the personal competence, it's all about self-awareness in the recognition what I see. It's my ability to walk in the room, and if I see people who are not like me, I understand that I'm going to go into that room with a bias. All right. And I'm going to bring up an example. Again, going back to my prison days. Back in the day when I was doing therapy in the prison, there was so much PC, political correct language be behind whether you should call someone from Mexico a Mexican American. Should you call them Hispanic or should you call them Mexican? Back then, that was a huge thing. Okay. And so in a therapy group, I had a large number of individuals who were Mexican American, Hispanic American. Back then, who knew? Because we weren't sure what we should say. So I transversed both of those terms and I started using the term Mexican American or Hispanic American, Mexican American, because I wasn't sure what term I should use. Self-awareness, aware of my own biases and ignorance. And one of my group members one day, I think it was like the third group. And trust me, this is scary in a prison. Okay. She slammed her hand on her chair And she said, "Stop calling me Hispanic. I'm Mexican." And we had to clear the room. Correction officers had to come in. This is how awful this situation is. And I want to bring this up because it's important, because this comes down to the self-awareness component. Where her family originated is a place in Mexico where there was a large division between people who considered them Hispanic, which means their origins came from Spain largely, versus Mexican, where their origins mainly came from their indigenous Mexican heritage. And back in that time, I did not have enough self-awareness to know that difference. And so I was interchanging those terms, not knowing that I was insulting someone I didn't know anything about. Okay. And yes, that was a awakening a moment for your professor. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have this great amount of self-awareness to know what I should know in a situation. In the other thing, recognition, what I see in this example is social awareness. Social awareness is the ability to see other people for who they are. The thing in the example that I gave you, I should have never been using the term Mexican American or Hispanic or anything else. Those were not terms that should have been used in that situation, because all of those individuals that were there to get treatment for an addiction, for PTSD. They weren't there to be labeled as a woman, Hispanic, Mexican, white, indigenous, Indian, Native American. They weren't there to be labeled by me as a therapist. I was there to help them because they all had a common problem, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their culture, regardless of I was there to help. And that's the social awareness part, is we're there regardless of who the individual is, and understanding where that individual is coming from. But see how these two things interplay with each other? That my self-awareness, my ignorance, my bias fed into my social awareness, and that gave into more ignorance and more bias. And I hope you're seeing this on that scale when we walk into a room and we're trying to help someone. All right. A thing that I learned from this is that when I came and confronted someone who was different than me, I spent an inordinate amount of time learning about them. So I'll give this example of where I think I grew in this area. So after the prison situation and going through that and learning from that, I went back into dealing with relationship violence, domestic violence. And as I had mentioned, I think in this class, the majority of people tended to be in the community that I was in, because it was 95% white, so it was 99% women, and it was 88% Christian. So most of the people that came into my office were white female Christians. Okay. One day, I think I've already brought up the male example, so I'm going to bring up the female example. After my experience in the prison, one day, a female walked into my office and she was Muslim. And I was like, I studied this in college, and she was highly religious in her religion. And I knew that would be a strength for her. So instead of doing what I did in the prison, when I went home that night, I broke out a Quran. I got a history on Muslim religion and Islamic religion, and I became self-aware because I knew that person's strength was in her religious belief. I became self-aware, and that gave me social awareness of where she was coming from and why even though she came from a very, very violent home, why it was so hard for her to leave it because of those beliefs. But then using her beliefs, we were then able to grow from them, where we were able to use her belief system to realize that she had an importance beyond being abused and neglected in that home. Okay. So this is self-awareness and social awareness. On the regulation end, regulation, what I do, self-management versus relationship management. Oh, let me go back. Sorry about that. Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, so what do I do? Again, I'm going to go back to my prison example. In the situation with the Hispanic Mexican issue, okay, my self-management was I'm the smart one. I'm being PC because I'm using both terms. I'm know what I'm talking about. Okay. That was my self-management at that point. And the relationship management is once something got out of control and someone was insulted by what I said, I closed the group and brought in the correction officers. Does that sound like a good, healthy environment where someone can grow from and develop from and be who they are? No, it's not. So here's the self-management part. And again, I'm going to go back to the few females I worked with that were Muslim, Islamic. Okay, is when I entered that situation after what I went through in the prison situation. I went, okay, this person has a high faith. She believes in a religion. She's part of it. It's an important component of who she is. So my opinion about Islam, about being Muslim, didn't matter because I was ignorant to it. I didn't understand it. I was a white boy from Idaho. All right. So my self-management technique was let me hear her story. I'm going to listen and I'm going to understand. I took in her story on a self-management level, and then I went into relationship management mode where I took the responsibility to go and learn about her and learn about her faith, learn about things I didn't understand. I took that upon myself to go and do those things. That's relationship management, not assuming that your position will work with everyone else. In the group setting, this is what happens. In the group setting, what often happens is the person with the biggest ego gets up when someone is saying they're going through a crisis and they go, well, what I would do in that situation is X, Y, and Z. And as a facilitator, I hope you stop that and realize that person's experience does not equally translate into someone else's experience. What works for one person does not work for another person. And I'm going to bring up a biological example. Let's talk about antidepressants. Did you all know that it takes adjusting the type of antidepressant about 5 times before the average person actually gets biological relief from depression? So even on the biological level, everyone does not respond in the same way to a medication. Some people require a serotonin medication that increases serotonin. Some people require medication that increases dopamine. Some people require things that work on an opiate level. Some require medications that work on a serotonin and dopamine level. But one medication does not work for everyone. It's all individual. And that's the thing we need to remember when it comes to this emotional intelligence and coming down to this. So maybe I've been on a soapbox too long, but so on the personal competence, it comes down to self-awareness. What I see, the ability to recognize your emotions as they happen and understand the general tendency on your level, and understanding your biases, your emotions, your reactions, and being able to put those in a bag, put them aside, and then go into the situation unbiased and understanding. That's the power of emotional intelligence. Okay. On uh, it's about self-management, what I do, using awareness of your emotions to choose what you say and not what you do. That's the primary uh, component of emotional intelligence, not reacting, but understanding. Social competence is what I see, understanding where the other person is coming from. Whether you agree or not, it doesn't matter. This is one of the things that being a therapist in the area of trauma and addiction, if you're going to be a therapist in the prison system, that you really need to grasp and understand. What is important is the person's reality, not the facts. We are not investigators. We are not police officers. We are not judges. We have to exist in the reality that the person has created for themselves. And our job is then afterwards understanding that reality, helping them grasp an idea of a healthier place to be and a healthier understanding of where to be. So, what we see needs to be the reality of our client, not the reality of us, not the reality of a private investigator, not a reality of a police officer. Our client's reality has to become the reality we understand if we're really going to help someone. Okay. All right. Let's go on with social competence. Relationship management. This helps us manage the relationship using awareness of others' emotions to see what you say and do in order to make a positive, direct behavior. So I think I mentioned in this class before that one thing we should kind of look out for with intakes into our group are people who are neurotic or psychopathic. Okay. When I say neurotic, I mean high in neuroticism, meaning that they have such a level of self-love that the only way they love is if someone loves them back. Okay. So I want you to think about a high neurotic person. Someone who is high in neuroticism does not give a crap about the local child hospital, the local humane society, the local anything. But they can be a local leader, a pastor, someone else. Why? Because those people get love from everyone else. And that's the only way they can experience love and joy is if they get it from everyone else. But they can't just give it on their own. They can't just say, I'm going to donate to children because I love children. The only way that they will donate to a child cause is if children love them. The only way they will give to the Humane Society is if animals love them. Okay. They can't give. So that's someone who is high in neuroticism. Someone who is psychopathic takes that to the next level. So high in neuroticism, they can see that children suffer, they can see that animals suffers, but they don't care. Someone who is psychopathic doesn't see the animal. They don't see the child. They don't see the other human. What they see is something they can use, something they can consume, something that is useful to them, but they could throw away regardless. All right. That's the line between neuroticism and psychopathology. And when you have individuals, and this comes to the social competency part of of emotional intelligence, when you have someone like that in a group, they're not treatable. One, there has never been a psychopath who has successfully gone through group therapy or individual therapy. They're not treatable. Narcissist, there's some level of treatment that you can do. There's some level of at least cognitive management you can do with them. Okay. But both in a group setting will make the group worse. What psychopaths learn in treatment is how to be a better psychopath. Because when you talk about how you should regulate an emotion in a crisis, they're learning how they should mimic that emotion in a crisis. They're not so that they can use it to their benefit. And they tend to make other group members worse. And I'll bring up an example. I once had, I co-facilitated a batter's treatment. And in that treatment group, there was a person that had my same last name. And eventually he dumped his wife in the uh, 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 San Francisco Bay. I won't bring up who that is, but that, if you sounds familiar with my last name and that person, you'll understand who that is. That person was in a batter's treatment group with me and another person. Okay. In that group, um, he he said things to take emotional control over the facilitators. So what he would do, and he very much picked on the female facilitator that I was with. He would pick on her. He would pick on her. And once she got frustrated and she showed her frustration, he would do this. He would clip his fingers and go, "Ha, I'm in control of this group. You're not. You're mine." That is one of the most clearest cognitive examples of how emotional intelligence for the facilitator is important, because from the beginning of that group, that person should have been removed from the group. A letter should have been sent to the judge saying this person would not be successful in this group setting. That's social competence. Realizing that if someone gets your emotions and they're in control of it, you no longer have social competence. You no longer are in control of the situation. Okay? So that's an example, another example from my experience. All right, we won't go over this. We've done that. Okay, guys, what time is it? Let's see, what time is it? Hey, gang, let's take a 10-minute break. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop our recording. Let's